would like to show you this afternoon is what we developed in terms of selecting safe speed limits, because we think that safe speed limits are at the heart of our roads, or should be at the heart of our roads. And within our guide for safe speeds, we came up with a new model to actually guarantee that we achieve speeds that are safe for all road users. And I would just like to walk you through our ideas behind and present you, together with my colleagues Siba and Blair, this new model that we have developed to actually select a safe speed for each and every type of road, no matter if it's rural or urban. May I ask you to show us the next slide, please? Because first of all, we need to decide what we understand when we talk about a safe speed limit. We say a safe speed limit is a speed limit, certainly, that considers safe system principles. We talked about the safe system yesterday. We already saw the limits the human body has in terms of crash forces, and that these limits are rather well researched. There's lots of research and scientific evidence out there that there are certain forces, and in these combinations, certain speeds that the human body actually can withstand. And if you remember from Tuesday, the discussions we had, we saw the curves with fatality probabilities and fatality risks, and we saw that based on these curves, we can define, or we could define, something that we call safe system survivable speeds. And these are typically 30 kilometers per hour on roads where pedestrian crashes could happen, 50 kilometers per hour on roads where side impact crashes could happen, and 70 kilometers per hour on roads where head-on collisions might happen. So this is the first basis when we define a safe speed limit, that we consider these limitations. We already said that these are maximum speeds, because these are always related to at least about 10% of people still being involved in a fatal accident, and people actually not considering severe injury crashes. So what else is needed if we want to know what the safe speed limit is about? We need to take into account the needs and the vulnerabilities of all road users. We were trained in a way that we put in road design, in road engineering, a very strong focus on motorized traffic. We were trained in a way where we said we build roads, cars. And now there is a huge shift in thinking where we say, when we design a road, when we design a safe road, when we design a road that has a safe speed limit, we need to take into account all the road users on a certain stretch of road, and we have to be aware of what road users are actually present. And this goes beyond the function of the road, because we know, especially also on rural roads, we might have pedestrians present, even if the road is classified as a highway, for example. And the road where pedestrians are present, where bicyclists are present, where motorcycles are present, needs a different speed limit than a road that is just used by motorized traffic. Then a safe speed limit needs to consider the current road use and the current infrastructure that's there. So we are talking about the current road users, not only about vehicle road use, but again about all types of road users, with a special focus on vulnerable road users. And a safe speed limit is a speed limit that aligns with community well-being objectives. So it's not only the road users, but also with a safe speed limit, we try to consider the people that live next to a road, the communities that are surrounding the road, because we say to create, and this is what we heard on Tuesday, safe speeds. And in these terms, often lower speeds have a really positive impact on community well-being and on social interaction among communities. Roads with very, very fast traffic really divide communities in half. It's no longer possible for people who live there to actually interact. And this is a huge problem and a huge issue in many countries around the world. So a safe speed limit is a speed limit that supports community well-being and is finally inclusive, thus generating a more equitable outcome for everybody and not just for a few. We have to keep in mind one principal aim of the safe system approach is that safety has to be combined with mobility, and if we want to sacrifice, if sacrifices are needed, they have to be started those persons that create dangers to others. So if we think in terms of road safety, in terms of mobility management, we have to have certain restrictions. We need to start at those that create the dangers for the others and not with the ones who actually are the victims in terms of a traffic in terms of a traffic crash. So what's from my point also very important, and this is written at the end of this slide, is that a safe speed limit must not always be equal to a low speed limit. If we just think about well-designed motorways, a safe speed limit is a speed limit that fits to the road and the road users that are present on the road. So if the road users are well protected, for example, on a motorway, if you think of a motorway with good side protection, with good median protection, with access control in terms of vulnerable road users, even a higher speed limit can be a safe speed limit. So we need to consider, and this is shown on the next slide, we need to consider obviously that there are safe system survivable speed limits that we already discussed when certain types of road users are present, but we also need to consider that for certain types of roads, if we succeed to protect vulnerable road users, mainly, higher speeds are possible and can still be safe speeds. And I think this is a really important message, because normally we often have in mind that the safe speed limit is always a low speed limit. This is true in certain environments, but not in all environments. And obviously there's a difference in speed selection, whether you have pedestrians walking along the road, whether you have school zones with many kids walking along the road, if you have hospital areas where you would have people who maybe have disabilities. So this needs to be considered in speed selection. But the issue is, and we will show this a little later on, also in our examples, that the most important thing is that the speed limit needs to be in line with the road use and the road users that are actually present. And if you can restrict certain types of road users on certain types of roads with good infrastructure, you can obviously have higher speed limits in place. If we look at the next slide, I would just like to quickly discuss principles for selecting such safe speed limits. And we have one principle that governs them all. And this is the safety for all principle. But safety for all is not the only principle that we need to consider. We also need to consider community well-being. We need to consider practicability, and we need to consider network availability. And we will look at all these 4 principles a little bit more in detail on the next few slides. We start out with the guiding principle, and this is the safety for all principle. We said that one aim of the safe system approach is that we want to eliminate fatal and serious injuries for all road users by keeping speeds to tolerable levels for the human body. And another thing is, and this is also very crucial in terms of the safe system, is that we don't wait for crashes to happen. We don't follow a reactive approach. We want to be proactive by employing approaches that anticipate risk, that adapt to changes, and that align with the surrounding context and needs of the people that are present on the road. We use a shared approach that targets all different players in the road system, including the policymakers and the road safety stakeholders, as well as the technical experts and the road users. It's really important, and this is what Siba showed us in the first session, to also include the community, because it's often the case that the communities directly affected want lower speeds. It's not like that when you live close to a road, that you actually strive for higher speeds. The normal case is that you are really in favor of bringing speeds down in these areas. And from my point, as a scientist and as a researcher, the most important thing that we always need to use evidence. Road safety work is not about gut feelings. It's not like with soccer, with football, we know we have millions of experts. And sometimes I have the impression with road safety work, it's the same. Everybody's a road user, so everybody's an expert. And everyone has a gut feeling, but this is not necessarily fact, as also Siba showed us. There are so many myths around there, and our aim as road safety practitioners, as road safety experts, is to actually use evidence to fight these most common misbeliefs, that integrate different planning tools, also in the political and community engagement. Also via enforcement, via communication, we know exactly what works and what doesn't work. And we will have one presentation in session 3 on these issues, because we are absolutely clear on what works and what doesn't work, and we should use this evidence to keep people safe. If we look at the next principle, that's community well-being, and we said that we would like to prioritize equity and health and environmental well-being of the community by really considering the co-benefits of safe speeds. We saw this in session 1, that there are many other positive benefits on speed management, and we would like to set speed limits, especially on local roads, at levels that support active travel, like walking and cycling. We saw this circle in the first session, where we see if you reduce travel speeds or vehicle speeds, then people are more willing to cycle and also to walk, because it creates nicer walking and cycling environments. And we would like to set speed limits by consulting the affected communities, because they often support that speeds go down. In terms of predictability, which brings us directly to the next slide, I just want to mention one major key thing, and this is that we need to set speed limits that are consistent with speed limits on roads in similar environments with similar characteristics and road user needs, because then these speed limits are clearly understood and easily understood by the drivers. And we don't want to change speeds too often, so we would like to keep speed limit changes to a minimum. And go for the lower speeds if we would otherwise need to change speed limits quite frequently. And I always like the idea of the ultimate self-explaining road, because this would be a road that is designed in such a way that speed limits are no longer needed. So this is the ultimate aim, to have a road that exactly tells the driver what speed we would like them to drive. And finally, network availability. So there is no use in just looking at one stretch of road or one section of road. we should take a network-wide approach to mobility planning, also in terms of setting speed limits to provide safety and efficiency across the whole road network for all road users. So not only for motorized traffic, but network availability means also road cycling networks, pedestrian networks that should be made available for the road users to have them when they need them. And that the speed limits reflect the infrastructure available and the actual route use of the road rather than just road classification systems. And we should plan the road network to provide the needed infrastructure for all road users present and to provide also safe alternative routes if they are needed. In terms, for example, that people are not forced to use a motorway that's actually axis controlled if they are on foot or in a very slow moving vehicle. If we look at the next slide, we see rather clearly that there is a huge interaction of road use, infrastructure, and speed. So road use and road users govern infrastructure and speed limits. So it's not about the hierarchical position of a road in a framework, but the actual road users that are there. And this brings me directly to the Roads-for-Life framework on the next slide. Why a new framework for selecting safe speed limits? What we have now is that in most countries, we have traditional road classification systems, so-called road hierarchies as a basis. And these road classification systems were developed at a time where the main focus was on motorization and on fast and efficient motorized transport. And these systems often neglected the safety of the most vulnerable road users. And this is not in line with what we need, because what we need is a comprehensive classification system for speed limit setting that matches the road use, the speed limit, and the road design elements as I showed on the previous slide. A good example is what happens in the Netherlands. They already tried to create such a comprehensive system and are already advanced, but even the Netherlands are not really there. Because such a system, to implement such a system that integrates all the road user needs lots of time, needs lots of vision, needs a long implementation period and adequate funding to protect really all types of road users with adequate design on all types of roads. And we are simply in a situation where we don't have such a system. So what to do in the meantime? In the meantime, the Roads-for-Life framework should kick in, because this is a system that we see on the next slide that's based on movement and place philosophy and actually considers the presence of vulnerable road users on various types of roads and brings it in a matrix format in connection to the movement of people and goods on different types of roads. And we've created such a framework for rural roads as well as for urban roads. And for rural roads, we see that dependent on the presence of vulnerable road users, speed limits could vary rather widely. Whenever you have roads that kids use, for example, to walk for school, even if they are classified in a road hierarchy as a highway, you need to bring speed limits down to levels of around 30 kilometers per hour for these stretches of roads that are used for vulnerable road users. And in other contexts, for example, if you have axis control motorways, as I said, you could bring speed limits up on these types of roads to around 100 kilometers, because there you won't have these conflicts with vulnerable road users. I would really like to invite you to study these frameworks for rural roads in detail. If we go to the next slide, we provided you with information also in the guide on different types of roads or road sections and their descriptions. for different rural road types like human activity roads or rural access roads up to access controlled roads, where we identified what speed limits we could use on these different types of roads. If we look just very quickly through some local examples, you see on the next slide an example for a human activity road. This is a road where you have also pedestrians, or where you might have pedestrians and cyclists present close to the road where pedestrians and cyclists might cross. So this is not a road, even if it's in a more rural area, where you could use higher speed limits. We will see examples a little bit later on. If we look at the second type, which is the rural access roads, these are road spaces which provide access to residential or industrial activity and support these activities, as you have lots of intersections and lots of crossing traffic. 50 kilometers per hour would be the speed to go at intersections, with an increase to 70 kilometers per hour on where there are no intersections on these types of roads. Then thirdly, we would have rural link roads that provide the link between the rural access roads and the rural access controlled roads, also with speeds between 70 and 80 kilometers per hour. And finally, we would have rural access controlled roads, typically motorways, where you have limited access or no access for vulnerable road users, as they are prohibited by access control. And on these types of roads that are shown on the next slides, where you have good side and median protection, you could bring up speeds to 100 kilometers per hour. And this would be the framework for the rural roads. I really invite you to look at these a little bit more into detail in the guide. And I will hand it over to Siba, because she will show you the similar framework for urban roads, which is even more interesting than the rural roads framework.
Thank you, Eva. Thanks everyone for joining us today for this second session. As Eva mentioned, the urban roads.
Excuse me, there are people in the chat that join later and doesn't know about the interpretation channels. So please look for the globe in the left bottom corner of your screen, and there you can access the interpretation channel that you need. We have interpretation in Portuguese and Spanish. Thank you. I'm sorry, Siva. Go on.
No problem. It's important that everyone can understand what we're saying. If we can go to the next slide, please. And look at the urban roads. As Eva mentioned, this is even more interesting because this is where more nuances are happening. There's more room for conflict, because most of the vulnerable road users are present. This is where the residential areas, commercial areas are happening, while we still have the need for road users to for road uses to move vehicles across cities, or from one city to the outskirts, to the outside of the city. And you'll see here even the diagram for urban roads, and the different categories are even more than the rural roads. And this is due where there's to the fact that there's more room for overlap between the two uses, the presence of vulnerable road users and the need to move people and goods. And you'll see here that the speeds vary from as low as 10 kilometers per hour at certain roads, all the way up to 80 kilometers per hour, even though this high speed in urban roads should be very rare and very restricted infrastructure and conditions, and I'll talk about it in a minute. Next. You'll see here a further description of each type of road or group of roads that will, the way to categorize these roads to identify the right speed or speed range. As Eva mentioned, you'll find this in the guide to look more closely into it, but I can jump to the next slide to talk to you about each of these type of roads through an example, starting with these what we call the shared roads. These are areas where there's a lot of presence of vulnerable road users, so the priority should be for the vulnerable road users, but we'll still find cars present, or motor vehicles in general. These are usually areas where there are schools, majority of schools. There's other social infrastructures such as a hospital, nursing homes, etc. So these require that there's a lot of vulnerable road users on the road, crossing, elderly, children crossing the road or present or being dropped off or walking to school from their residence or a nearby neighborhood. So as I said, the priority should be for those road users, but while there's still some vehicles passing through or dropping off, that's why it's really important to keep the maximum speed at 10 kilometers per hour. So there'll be very limited room for conflict and crashes, and if any crashes happen, then the risk for injury will be very limited. And you see here is a picture of a school area. There isn't much of vulnerable road users in the picture as of now, but you can see that the infrastructure is mostly flat. There isn't a difference between where the pedestrians or the cars go because the speed limit is very low. Next. Then we go to the next category, which we call the urban human activity roads and city hubs, which includes most of the commercial centers, the city centers, where most of the commercial activity is happening. There's a lot of vulnerable road users moving around, accessing and exiting businesses and stores and office buildings and other official buildings, but still we have also vehicles passing through, accessing these buildings or going through the road. So this is why it's important to keep the maximum speed at 30 kilometers per hour, but also provide the right infrastructure. Here we expect a lot of pedestrians crossing or even cyclists or other vulnerable road users crossing. So we want to provide the right sidewalks, crosswalks, potentially raised crosswalks, especially when there isn't signalized intersections. So, and while keeping the speed at a maximum of 30 kilometers per hour, we're providing the right signage and warnings and infrastructure. Next. Then we have the urban main roads. These are more seeing the priority.
Hello?
With vulnerable road users, because there are a lot of businesses still that are fronting on the road. So,
Siba, can you hear us?
yes, I got muted for some reason. Can you hear me now?
Now we can. Yeah, you froze for a second and we lost you
Okay.
for a second.
Okay, I'll go back and start this section. Okay. So the urban main roads, this is where these are bigger roads. There's room for, the priority is shifting more towards the motor vehicles. Motor vehicles are using these roads more as a priority to move from one part of the city to another. But we will still have presence of vulnerable road users because there's still buildings and businesses fronting the road. And you'll see here that the maximum speed limit is a range between 30 to 50 kilometers per hour, and that really differs based on the number of vulnerable road users that is present, how much there's buildings fronting this road, and the supporting infrastructure. So when we have less vulnerable road users, more protected infrastructure, signalized intersections, let's say separated bike lanes and protected bike lanes, then we can go up to 50 kilometers per hour, especially when there are less buildings fronting the road. While in cases where we don't have signalized intersections, there's more vulnerable road users, more buildings fronting, there's other social infrastructure on the road, then the speed should remain at 30 kilometers per hour, despite the fact that this is more of a main road. Then we treat it more of a commercial city hub. Next. Then we move to our last category, which are the urban link roads, and this includes the urban motorways and urban arterials. Again, we have a range here between 50 and 70 kilometers per hour. These are and even sometimes it can reach up to 80. So this again where the land use or the priority is shifting more and more towards the movement of people and goods. These are roads that are connecting, you know, a strategic area in the city to the outskirts, to another city, or across the city with less businesses and presence of vulnerable road users. And again, here the choice between the speed limit depends a lot on the presence of vulnerable road users, the land uses surrounding, and the infrastructure present. We can only get to the 70 kilometers per hour when the presence of vulnerable road users is really not expected, and there is separation of those. We have medians separating the lanes. We have, you know, the edges of the road are separated. There's no access allowed for vulnerable road users, no sidewalks. And then if there's need for crossing from one side to another for minimal use, then we have pedestrian bridges. These are mostly, you know, roads that are only for motor vehicles. In cases when we have more businesses fronting, even if this is a more strategic road, then the speeds have to be lowered. The infrastructure, we have to treat it as the previous category. Will have the right sidewalks, signalized intersections, clear crosswalks, and more safety requirements for this type of roads. And I think that concludes our urban roads, and I'll hand it over to Blair to tell us more about applications from the real life, from examples from different countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Siba, and good morning to everybody. It's great to be here, and I'm very pleased to see such a big audience. This is such an important topic in terms of road safety, such a big problem for us, but the good news is we have many of the solutions, and this is a problem we can solve, and particularly through this framework. And the last few slides in this presentation, I'll just talk briefly about some of the experience that we've had applying this framework in various countries. During the development of the guidance, and since that time, we've used this in a number of different countries. And so what I want to do is just show some of the lessons that we've picked up based on that previous experience. So if we go to the next slide, the first lesson I think that's important is that for some countries, this is not a big step. It's more of a natural progression. So it isn't a big change in many cases. And I've been really excited to see that many countries now have provision for 30 kilometers per hour speed limits in urban areas. Many countries already have a maximum speed of maybe 60 or 70 on their lower quality rural roads and a higher speed for motorways. So one of the lessons really is that we just need to use these more than we have been in the past. Although some countries don't have the ability to use some of these speed limits, and so a very first action that they will need to look at is changing the laws and regulations to allow these new speed limits to be used, particularly the 30 speed limits in urban areas. Next slide shows lesson number 2. I think the framework really tells us that this is not so much of a technical challenge. We now have a lot of the solutions to address speed and to improve the situation. We know the locations to address first as a priority, where the risk actually lies. We know which speeds we should use, which speed limits. And we also know the solutions on how to support those speeds through infrastructure and through enforcement and other measures. It's more about the issues like the engagement with decision makers, with politicians, and the engagement with communities, which is causing us the barriers. And there's now a lot of work trying to address those sorts of issues. And we also have many solutions based on our experience, which we can talk about perhaps a little later. The third lesson is that we've seen this movement and place framework where essentially it tells us that roads have got lots of different functions. It's not just about moving traffic, motorized cars and trucks. It's about moving people and goods. And so there's lots of different reasons that we have roads and streets. They serve lots of different functions. And this framework that you've seen today really helps explain these different functions. It's a really good way for us to communicate with decision makers and the public about the different roles that different roads and streets actually have. So not all streets are the same. There's lots of different functions. So this is a really useful framework for us to have some conversations about the link between safety and efficient movement of traffic. As we've heard from Eva and Siba, there are some roads where we do want faster travel. On those roads, though, we need to have good, safe infrastructure to allow that to happen safely. The other thing is this framework, I think, allows us to have some conversations about linking road safety to other agendas like active transport. So making sure that there is provision for walking and cycling and other modes of travel, not just motorised travel. So a very useful communications device in this framework. Next slide shows lesson number 4. This is a bit more technical. So in those earlier slides, you saw that for each of these road types, we often have a range of speeds. It might be that the speed would be between 50 and 70 or between 70 and 80. One of the difficulties we've found in applying this framework and the lesson we've learned is that it's useful to give very direct guidance about when would you use a 60 kilometre speed limit or a 70. There's some countries now who have developed quite detailed criteria around when different speed limits should apply. And this has actually been very useful because it makes very clear for the technical staff, the engineers, but also for the public and for decision makers about why we choose the speed limits that we use. And a good example of this might be on a rural road, if there is a median barrier in the middle of that road, which separates the directions of travel, then we can have higher speeds. So that's the sort of criteria that many countries are developing for rural roads, but also for urban streets as well. So that's sort of an extra step that is often required in this process. Next slide shows lesson number 5, and that is that we often know where we think speed limits should change, but it's back to that earlier comment I made. It's not just about the technical issues, it's also about the challenge of communications to the public and to decision makers. And so a really good lesson is, yes, we can identify those locations where speed limits need to change, but often it's best to start where there is strong community interest. And we can understand that through surveys of local communities and other mechanisms. And so some countries have developed frameworks, and this is one example in this table where on one element they have the safety need, but also they have the level of interest from communities. And it's when we add these things together, we can actually help prioritise where to start first. will always be more successful where there is strong community support for that change. So firstly, start where there will be a safety need. Once we've identified all of those locations, it's often easy to start where the community understands that need for change. And then my last lesson is that the interesting next step amongst all of this is some countries are now developing some tools, and this brings together the framework into a tool that can help develop the speed limits required across the whole network. That's very important because, yes, we can make speed limit changes in one place and in the next place, but it's very good to have an overall plan, and that helps us prioritize where we should take our actions to have the most impact. These tools that are being developed are also very useful for consistency, making sure that those speed limits in one area are similar to speed limits in another area. And that's very useful. We heard Eva talk about predictability earlier. And it ensures a data-led approach, so we know that we can use this data to understand where the highest risk is, where speed limit change might have the biggest impact, and also bring in the information about the community support. But there's an obvious issue here that this requires data, and this is something we'll talk about in a later seminar. But I'll pause there, and I think perhaps we've got some time for some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Blair. And with this, we finish our presentation about the Roads-for-Life framework. We are excited to see that there are a few questions in the chat, so I will hand it over to our panelists, Eva, Siba, and Blair, to address your questions. Over to you guys.
Try to grasp the questions and hope that I didn't forget anyone. If this is not the case, then just post the question again. I have here a question. Hello from Mexico. In shared areas, pedestrians, bicyclists, and scooters on most roads, bicycles and scooters do not have speed limits. What is being done about this?
Jump in on that. And actually, in some locations, there's speed limits set for scooter when they're electric scooters and bicycles. There's limits set to the bicycle itself. There's a limit it can exceed. But generally, if that's not an option, the speed limit that is on the road should be applying to everyone. A bicycle, a motor vehicle, etc. So when we're setting the speed limit at 30 kilometers per hour, that should be for everyone, not just for motor vehicles. Of course, now the focus is more on motor vehicles because the risk is higher when a motor vehicle is going faster than the speed limit. If a car hits a pedestrian or a cyclist, there's a risk of killing them. While if a bicycle a bicycle in general, a regular bicycle is not going to easily reach that speed limit, and even if it does, when it's electric, the risk is much higher when it hits pedestrian. But there are tools to put a cap on the speed of that electric bicycles and scooters can go. In the city I live in Washington, D.C., that's the case, for example, that can be managed with companies that are presenting these vehicles or bicycles or scooters in certain areas. When there's a big number of pedestrians and there's a lot of room for conflict, then they put a cap. Then even if you're riding, no matter how speed you're trying to pedal, the bicycle cannot go faster. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, there was another question blowing in the same horn. Hello, good morning. Speed limit should also apply to groups of cyclists. And this was, I think, already now answered by Siba, because of course, if there is an existing speed limit, they should be valid for all road users. and if this reflects on conflicts between cyclists and pedestrians that often happen in mixed areas where there is a lot of pressure from cyclists on pedestrians, we see that this is really an upcoming problem also in many European cities where you don't have, where you have increasing conflicts between mainly electrified bikes and pedestrians. So this is an issue that we will certainly need to tackle, because compared to like bikes that are non-electric, you have much higher speeds with electric bikes, and there you have a new conflict that's on the horizon between pedestrians and cyclists. Then I have a question here. Hello, there's a lot of talk about speeding and maximum speeds. Can you also address minimum speeds? This can also have an impact on road safety. And this maybe is a little bit connected to another question that's, yeah, we can pretty much the same question is another one. So impact of minimum speeds.
Yeah, I can take that if you like, Eva. It's a good question, and some countries do have minimum speeds. Look, we do know that where there is big speed differentials, particularly when there's different types of road users on that same road, that does lead to increase in risk. We see that in many countries, and we in fact did some research on that from the World Bank to identify that particular issue. I think one of the solutions to that is probably a better solution is actually access control. So on our roads that we want to be faster, we do need to limit those roads so that slower moving vehicles are not able to be on those roads, and that will then create a safer, smoother flow of traffic as well. So that is the best solution. In other areas where there's mixed traffic and perhaps it's not high quality roads, then maybe we need to reduce the speed limit so that those faster vehicles come down in their speeds to being a bit slower. The last solution is also for separation between different road user groups, but that takes a lot of investment in infrastructure and is not always possible. So that's probably my quick solution. I see there's many questions now, Eva. Maybe we can reply to some of these in the chat as we go on.
Take one more, maybe one quick one, because I think that's an issue that's extremely important. I believe that one of the most imposing challenges that in many countries of LATAM are roads that were designed for rapid circulation with low population rates. Due to population growth, these areas have become more urban areas. The dilemma is to restrict speed limits or adapt roads for circulation with mixed speeds that respect risk areas, of course, with the impact of reducing mobility rates. And I think, but maybe Blair and Siba could kick in, this is what the whole Roads-for-Life system is about, that we see a similar situation in many parts around the world, in many cities, where you have cities exploding, becoming bigger and bigger, big city outskirts where simply the road use doesn't match the hierarchy of the road or the type of the road in a functional system. And we need to actually try to at least solve this dilemma by bringing speeds down to the actual types of road users that are present. And if it's vulnerable road users, if it's children, we need to provide safe speeds also in these city outskirts areas, because these are areas that are very often neglected in our traditional thinking, in our traditional functional road classification.
Yeah, and I can add here a little bit, as you mentioned, Eva, that's what the whole purpose of the framework that put together for this guide, and it supposedly makes it easier to tackle one road at a time and categorize it, even if you don't want to or don't have the capacity to tackle categorizing the whole road network, you can look at these charts and match the current road uses you have in your road and the land uses that you have to the right category, and see that there's a major differential between the current speed limit that you have and what's proposed in the guide. Regardless of the general or the original categorization that the city have set, this allows you to notice, okay, this means the categorization I have for this road is wrong or is not accurate anymore, and it requires reassessing. That should make it easier at least to identify the issue and the risk and start working towards it.
Thank you, Siba.